Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, desolates, herders, peasants, vassals, meat sacks. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. Let's go to Syria now, or actually to something that John Kerry said. And since I'm not even sure if he's from this planet, I can't use a geographical location like I usually like to do. But so now we have this ceasefire, which of course is already doomed to failure because we don't have all parties involved. And so we'll continue to have extremists I assume, extremists still operating, and there will be no cessation of hostilities as far as they're concerned. And in fact, we've had a number of noted large bombings carried out by ISIS that apparently make it clear what their stance is on this cessation of hostilities and the so-called ceasefire. But more dramatically is John Kerry from the United States coming out and talking about a Plan B in Syria. And normally this would be just something I would take note of for now and then wait to see if anything happens or if anything develops. But I found it fascinating that John Kerry even brought up this whole idea of a Plan B, or the dismantling of Syria. First of all, is it really going to be a United States decision? And if they bring Russia into the fold, I can't imagine that Russia is going to support some idea of partitioning Syria. And the fact is, right now, Assad has agreed to this so-called ceasefire. And I'm certainly, he's a little surprised to hear John Kerry talk about partitioning Syria. Then one has to look at just exactly what John Kerry's intentions are by saying something like this. Is it a threat? Is it leverage of, oh, okay, this is what's worse to come, so we need everybody to get with this ceasefire? Like I say, I have a hard time believing that because they don't really seem to be serious about the ceasefire, just because all parties haven't even been brought to the table. But another way to look at it is we know that this destabilization and fragmentation and possibly dismembering of countries in this region has been part of these long-range plans by a lot of right-wing think tanks and pundits and leaders in Israel and the United States, and it has been for a long time. So is this pushing in that direction? And of course, it has a lot of interesting implications. So I assume that they believe in breaking up Syria along the lines of a Sunni region, a Shia region, and then a Kurdish region. And obviously that has a lot of complications all the way around. First of all, considering how integrated the country is, there's going to be a violent transition as everyone tries to separate out. And that's aside from just the Shia and the Sunni and the Kurds, because we have all these subgroups, including Christians. So at one point, it's going to be it would be very difficult to achieve this separation, and then also the fact that once these regions are set up, how do you avoid many wars and confrontations between these new regions that are set up? And then and also, of course, it's complicated because who is going to enforce this? Is this where the Saudi Arabian troops and the Turkish troops and any talk of U.S. ground troops, some sort of international coalition goes in to try and enforce this breakup of the country? That'll certainly be something interesting to see. And then the emergence of a Kurdish region in there would be very profound. It doesn't seem like the United States cares one way or another. I think right now they're just using the Kurds in Syria to perpetrate their own agenda in Syria, just the same way the Russians are supporting the Kurds, because the Kurds are operating on a couple of different agendas, staying out of the fight against Assad, but also going after ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But Kurdistan, the rise of a free, or certainly a more separate Kurdistan, that region would have a lot of implications for Turkey and northern Iraq and Kurdistan there as well. So that's something I've discussed in other videos, and a whole other topic is just the complications of what happens with Turkey if a Kurdish region. So that's why the idea that there's going to be a coalition of Saudi Arabian and Turkish troops there really gets mind-numbing, because they're certainly not going to go there and enforce the protection of a Kurdish region there and help facilitate a breakup only to create a Kurdistan. And then one of the more other disturbing blueprints this could represent is certainly if they're willing to break up Syria, obviously they'd be willing to break up Iraq as well. So is that Plan B in Iraq too? That question has to be asked. And I assume that if they're thinking of a Plan B in Syria, and Kerry just blurts it out, then certainly they've been discussing that idea. And of course they would be. They've been talking about the idea of a Kurdish region as a Plan B in Iraq for a long time. Obviously, it facilitated the growth of that region through the U.S. protection. And but two of the really dynamic aspects of this whole thing that Kerry brought up that we need to talk about, or some serious implications that could come out of the idea of breaking up Syria. One of them, of course, is the idea that are we going to have regime change in Turkey? And just like a lot of these countries, you may think Erdogan is in charge. Everyone thought the leaders in Egypt were in charge, Mubarak, etc. But the army is in charge, and I would guess, particularly because of the size of the army and consistency of the military organization in Turkey, that the army is in control of things. And we could see the Erdogan government, things get too provocative. The U.S. Could have some ideas about regime change there, and then I'm attaching an article below that actually brought up this idea, and I thought it was fascinating. The article's very well written. It talks about the possibilities of regime change in Turkey, and considering some of the incendiary aspects of Erdogan and his policies in that region and playing both sides, things could get very complicated for him very quickly. So we don't want to rule this idea out, and particularly because it would really help facilitate U.S. and Israeli plans for the region if Turkey were to be a little more complacent and a little more compliant with the U.S. strategy in that region. And that brings up the last thing that is a very dynamic part of what could happen if Plan B, or the breakup of Syria, is somehow part of the U.S. plan. And that's the fact that Israel would finally get the Golan Heights permanently. The occupation of the Golan Heights, Syrian territory, has never been legally recognized. Israel's still been there since the '67 war. And if the Syria breakup happens, then Israel will undoubtedly be granted the Golan Heights permanently, and will take over not only the Golan Heights, but probably a little bit more than that, because they like to have a little demilitarized zone, some sort of buffer between them and Syria, depending on who ends up there. But so that's a pretty dramatic part of Plan B as well, I would assume. So there we have it. John Kerry talking about breaking up Syria. Something that's said on a whim and may not amount to anything, but an interesting idea that's brought up, and the fact that he said it in public is dramatic in itself. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.